Oida for refusing to pay my friend's share of the bill after she forgot her wallet. A few days ago, I went out to dinner with a group of friends. There were 6 of us in total. We had planned this for weeks, and I had been really looking forward to it. It's not every day that we get to meet up like this. We all have busy lives, so this kind of gathering always feels special. We went to a nice Italian restaurant that had just opened up in town. It was one of those trendy places where you have to make a reservation weeks in advance, and we were lucky enough to get a table. The evening started off really well. The ambience was cozy, the food smelled amazing, and everyone was in a great mood. We were laughing, talking about everything that had happened since we last saw each other: work dramas, relationship stuff, random funny stories. I had a glass of wine, and I remember thinking how happy I was at that moment, surrounded by friends and good food. The waiter came over, and we ordered appetizers, main courses, and a few bottles of wine for the table. The whole evening felt like a much-needed escape from the usual daily grind. One of my friends, Sarah, was there, too. Now, let me give you a bit of backstory on Sarah. She's the type of person who's always fun to be around. She's got this outgoing personality, always cracking jokes and lighting up a room. But Sarah also has this habit, which has been bothering some of us for a while now. It's a bit of a running joke in our group that she's a little forgetful, especially when it comes to paying her share. This isn't the first time she's conveniently forgotten her wallet or had some kind of excuse when it came time to settle the bill. But honestly, I'd never been the one directly affected by it until now, so I always kind of shrug it off. Anyway, dinner went on, and we were having a blast. The food was fantastic: pasta that was perfectly cooked, pizzas with crispy crusts, and desserts that melted in your mouth. We were all pretty much stuffed by the end of the meal, and we were just lounging around, finishing the last bits of our drinks, when the bill came. It was one of those situations where they brought a single check for the whole table, and we were all trying to figure out who owed what. As soon as the bill hit the table, I noticed that Sarah got a little quiet. She was sitting directly across from me, and I could see her fiddling with her phone, looking a bit awkward. Then, just as I expected, she said, "Oh my God, you guys, I think I left my wallet at home." She had this sheepish grin on her face, and she kind of laughed as if it was something that just happened by accident. But I could feel this weird tension immediately. Everyone else went quiet for a moment. It wasn't like an uncomfortable silence, but more of that expectant pause where you could just tell people were waiting for someone to step up and offer to cover her. And I knew exactly what that felt like, that moment when everyone's eyes dart around the table, and the pressure starts building. I think we were all tired of this happening, but no one really wanted to be the one to call her out either. It's like, you don't want to ruin the night, but at the same time, it's not fair to keep picking up someone else's tab, especially when you know there's a pattern. Sarah looked over at me, and I could feel her eyes on me. There was that awkward moment where we made eye contact, and I could tell she was expecting me to step up. I felt this internal struggle for a second, like, part of me wanted to avoid the whole awkward confrontation and just pay for her. But the other part of me was honestly tired of this happening. I knew if I gave in, it would just keep enabling her to do this again. So, instead of offering to cover her, I just said, "I can't cover you, sorry." It came out more bluntly than I intended. I tried to smile a little, to soften it, but there wasn't much I could do. Her face changed instantly. She looked genuinely surprised, and not in a good way. She kind of laughed, like she was trying to brush it off, and said, "I'll pay you back tomorrow, I promise." But I still didn't feel comfortable with it. I shook my head and said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm not comfortable covering other people's expenses." And that's when the atmosphere shifted. I could feel the tension grow thick around the table. Sarah's face went red, and she looked like she didn't know what to say for a moment. Then she said, "Wow, okay, that's kind of harsh, don't you think?" She tried to keep her tone light, but there was this edge to her voice. I could tell she was embarrassed. Everyone else just kind of looked down at the bill or at their phones. No one really wanted to get involved. It was like I had just done the unthinkable, and everyone was too stunned to react. Finally, one of our friends, Matt, sighed and said, "I've got it, Sarah. Don't worry about it." He pulled out his card and covered her share. But the whole vibe was off after that. The laughter was gone, and the rest of the night felt kind of forced. We still talked a little, but you could feel that everyone was just trying to get through the rest of the evening. As we all got up to leave, Sarah barely looked at me. She said goodbye to everyone else, but she didn't say a word to me. It felt weird, like I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but I still felt bad for some reason. I don't like making people feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, I didn't want to keep pretending like what she was doing was okay. I drove home that night feeling conflicted. Part of me was relieved that I'd finally stood my ground, but another part of me was worried that I might have really damaged my friendship with Sarah. The next day, I got a text from Sarah. It wasn't long, but it was pretty poignant. She said, "Hey, I just wanted to say that I think what you did last night was really out of line. You made me look bad in front of everyone. It was only a small amount, and I said I would pay you back. I don't understand why you had to make a big deal out of it." Reading it, I could feel my stomach sink a little. I didn't know how to respond. I put my phone down for a while, trying to figure out what I wanted to say. I didn't want to fight, but I also didn't want to apologize for something I felt wasn't my fault. Later on, I replied, "I'm sorry if it made you feel embarrassed, but I just wasn't comfortable covering for you. I think it's important that everyone pays their share, and it's not fair to keep expecting others to step up." I tried to keep it as polite as possible, but I could tell she wasn't going to let it go that easily. After that, I heard from a couple of our mutual friends. Some of them were on Sarah's side, saying I could have just covered her since she promised to pay me back and it wasn't a huge deal. They felt like I made an unnecessary scene and could have just avoided the whole situation. But others actually reached out to say they understood where I was coming from. They mentioned that Sarah has done this before, and that maybe it was time someone finally said no. They admitted they'd been annoyed by it too, but didn't want to be the one to say anything. Honestly, I feel conflicted. On one hand, I know I'm not responsible for covering someone else's meal, especially when it's not the first time. I don't think it's fair to just assume someone else will take care of your bill, especially when we're all adults with our own expenses. On the other hand, I feel bad because I know I embarrassed her. I could see it in her face, and I could feel the shift in the mood. I didn't want to be the one to ruin the night, but at the same time, I also didn't want to keep enabling her behavior. It's been a few days now, and things are still awkward between us. She hasn't really spoken to me since, and I've noticed she's been a bit distant in our group chat. A few weeks passed since the incident at the Italian restaurant, and things remained awkward between me and Sarah. Our friend group had carried on with the usual jokes and conversations in our group chat, but Sarah had noticeably been less active. I tried not to overthink it sometimes. People just need time to cool off. I also figured that maybe she realized she couldn't keep doing what she had been doing, and that our friendship would find a way to move past it eventually. After some time, one of our friends suggested we have another group dinner. It wasn't a new idea. We liked getting together regularly, and it felt like enough time had passed since the last dinner debacle. Plus, I was hoping that this could be an opportunity to clear the air with Sarah. Maybe we could move past the tension, and everything could go back to normal. We chose a trendy Asian fusion place that had a great menu, a lot of vegetarian options for a couple of our friends, and amazing cocktails. This time, I told myself I wasn't going to get caught up in any awkward financial situations. I made sure to bring cash, just to be extra prepared in case we ended up having to split the bill again. As the day of the dinner approached, I was actually feeling hopeful about it. When the day finally came, we all met up at the restaurant. Sarah showed up a bit late, but she was her usual bubbly self, hugging everyone, making jokes, and acting like nothing had ever happened. Part of me felt relieved. Maybe we could just leave the weirdness behind. The night started off great. Our drinks arrived, and the conversation was flowing naturally. We laughed over ridiculous memes, caught up on each other's work lives, and just enjoyed being together. The food was fantastic, the plates were beautifully arranged, and we passed around dishes so everyone could have a taste of everything. It felt almost like old times, like we were finally getting back on track. I was even starting to feel a little guilty, thinking that maybe I had been too harsh with Sarah before. After all, she was still my friend, and we had shared so many good times together. For a while, it seemed like everything was back to normal. But then, just as the check arrived, I felt this sense of déjà vu. I noticed Sarah shifting in her seat, glancing around at everyone in a way that seemed too familiar. The server set the bill on the table, and we all started pulling out our wallets. I saw Sarah rummage through her bag, and I just knew what was coming. I felt that same tension, that same awkwardness that I had felt at the last dinner. Sarah sighed dramatically and said, "Guys, I'm really sorry, but I only have about half of what I owe for my share." She had this apologetic smile on her face, and she looked around the table. "Could someone spot me for the other half? I promise I'll pay you back tomorrow." I couldn't help it, I just felt this mix of frustration and disbelief rising up inside me. Here we were, again. And what's worse, this time she was pulling a different kind of trick, like she thought we wouldn't notice that it was the same pattern with a different flavor. Before I could say anything, Matt, the same guy who had covered her last time, spoke up. He looked right at Sarah and said, "You know, Sarah, I never got paid back from last time. You promised me you'd pay me the next day, and I never saw that money." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and I knew the situation was about to take a turn. Sarah looked a little stunned, her face flushed a bit, and she tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I thought I paid you back. I'm really sorry, Matt, I must have forgotten." She tried to keep her voice light, but there was an edge to it. And that's when I lost it, not in an angry way, but in that kind of exasperated, I can single quotes T believe this is happening way. I just started laughing. I know it probably wasn't the most appropriate reaction, but I couldn't help myself. It was just too ridiculous, the way she was acting like it was no big deal when it was so obvious that this was a habit. Through my laughter, I said, "Sarah, is this your new invention? Last time, it was the forgotten wallet, and now it's only having half the amount. What's it going to be next time?" I couldn't stop myself. I was still laughing, but I knew there was a seriousness behind my words. I was tired of the games, tired of her assuming we'd all just cover for her without a second thought. Sarah's expression changed immediately. The smile disappeared, and she looked genuinely hurt. I could see her eyes narrow, and she muttered something under her breath, something I couldn't quite catch. She stopped looking at me altogether, and I could feel the tension come flooding back into the room. I glanced around at everyone else. Most of them looked uncomfortable, staring down at their plates or at their phones. Finally, one of our friends, Jessica, sighed and said, "I'll cover it this time, Sarah. But, honestly, this is starting to get old." Jessica's words hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah didn't say anything. She just nodded and looked down, her face flushed. The rest of the dinner was awkward, to say the least. We all tried to make small talk, but it was clear that the mood had shifted completely. No one was really into it anymore, and I think we were all just ready to leave. After we paid the bill and left the restaurant, Sarah didn't say goodbye to me. She hugged a couple of our friends, thanked Jessica, and then walked off without even looking my way. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I knew she was upset, but I also felt like I couldn't keep letting her pull these stunts without saying anything. Later that night, I got a text from Sarah. It was long, and I could tell she was upset. She said, "I can't believe you made fun of me like that in front of everyone. You completely humiliated me. I thought you were my friend, but clearly, you just wanted to embarrass me. It wasn't fair, and I don't know why you had to make a scene like that." I read the message a few times, and I felt this mix of emotions: guilt, frustration, anger. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but at the same time, I know I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't the one making a scene, she was, by continually putting us in these situations. I replied, "Sarah, I didn't make fun of you. You made fun of yourself by not paying Matt back and then trying to pull another excuse tonight. You can't keep expecting everyone to pay for you, and then get mad when someone finally calls you out on it. It's not fair to us, and it's not okay." A few minutes later, I got another reply from her, and this one was even more shocking. She said, "I'm a girl. It's normal for guys or even friends to help pay for me when I'm short. It's what friends do. You're acting like it's such a big deal, but this is just how things are." I was stunned. I stared at my phone for a long time, rereading her message. I couldn't believe she actually thought that was a valid reason, that just because she was a girl, it was somehow okay for her to keep expecting us to cover for her. It felt like such an outdated, entitled mindset, and I didn't know how to respond. I ended up just saying, Sarah, we're all adults here. It's not about being a girl or a guy. It's about taking responsibility for yourself and not assuming others will always bail you out. I hope you understand that. She didn't reply after that. After Sarah's last message, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of letting it eat at me or feeling bad, I decided to share the situation with our friend group. I took screenshots of our conversation and sent them to our group chat. I didn't add any commentary, just let the messages speak for themselves. Part of me was worried they might think I was overreacting, but honestly, I was at my wits' end and needed their perspective. To my surprise, the reaction was immediate and unanimous. Everyone started chiming in, and the responses ranged from disbelief to outright laughter. Matt, especially, was amused at Sarah's justification. He made a joke about how he hadn't realized he was signing up to be her personal sponsor. Others expressed shock at her sense of entitlement. Some of the girls in our group were particularly annoyed at her using the "I'm a girl" excuse, saying that it set a bad precedent for all of them. It was clear to everyone that Sarah had crossed a line, and no one wanted to keep being put in that situation. Despite all of this, we still genuinely missed hanging out as a group. Sarah was part of our circle, and even though her behavior was frustrating, we had been friends for a long time. So, a few weeks after the incident, we decided to plan another group dinner. It was a bit of a leap of faith, but we all hoped that maybe this time things would go more smoothly. I think, deep down, we all wanted to give Sarah a chance to redeem herself. We chose a casual diner this time, nothing too fancy, just a cozy place where we could relax and enjoy each other's company without worrying about a massive bill at the end. When we all met up, it felt like we were picking up right where we left off. Everyone was in high spirits, and the atmosphere was light and cheerful. We laughed, shared stories from the past few weeks, and just enjoyed being together. Even Sarah seemed to be in a good mood, joking around and joining in on the conversations like nothing had happened. We ordered our food: burgers, fries, milkshakes, the kind of comfort food that made it impossible not to have a good time. The conversation was non-stop, with everyone chiming in, telling funny stories, and catching up on each other's lives. It felt great, like we were finally moving past all the awkwardness and tension. For a while, I let myself believe that maybe Sarah had learned her lesson and that everything could go back to normal. Then the check arrived. The server placed the bill on the table, and we all started reaching for our wallets. I noticed Sarah hesitate for a moment, and I felt that familiar sense of dread creeping up. She sighed loudly, just like she had at the last dinner, and said, "Guys, I forgot my wallet. Someone's going to have to pay for me." But this time, something different happened. Everyone was so engrossed in their conversations, laughing and talking over each other, that they didn't even seem to hear her. I watched as Sarah's eyes darted around the table, a look of frustration growing on her face. She repeated herself, this time a little louder, "Hey, I forgot my wallet. Can someone pay for me?" Once again, no one seemed to hear her. I could see that everyone had heard her, they were just pretending not to. The conversation continued, and everyone was talking and laughing as if nothing had happened. I could see Sarah starting to get visibly annoyed. She raised her voice again, this time with a tone that was almost demanding. "I need someone to pay for me. I don't have my wallet." The entire table went quiet for a moment. Everyone looked at Sarah, and then, almost as if on cue, they all burst out laughing. It wasn't a mean-spirited laugh, but it was definitely one of those "are you serious" moments. Matt, who had been the one to cover for her before, shook his head and said, "Not this time, Sarah. You're going to have to figure it out." The look on Sarah's face was one of pure shock. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, Jessica chimed in, "Sarah, come on, we're not doing this again. You're going to have to pay for yourself." Sarah looked around the table, as if expecting someone to step in and help her, but no one said anything. Everyone just looked at her, waiting to see what she would do. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. She had it the whole time. She opened it, took out her card, and paid for her share of the bill. The entire table went silent for a moment, and then everyone burst out laughing again. It was a mix of shock and disbelief. All this time, she had her wallet, and she was just trying to pull the same stunt again. I couldn't help but laugh. It was almost comical, the way she had tried to play us, only to be caught red-handed. Jessica leaned over, still laughing, and said, "So, are you going to pay back Matt now? You promised you would, and you never did." The rest of us nodded in agreement, and I could see Sarah's face turn red. She tried to laugh it off, saying, "Come on, guys, it's not a big deal. I'm a girl, it's normal for friends to help me out sometimes." But that just made everyone laugh even harder. Matt, still smiling, said, "Sarah, it's not about being a girl, it's about keeping your word. You said you'd pay me back, and you didn't. We're all friends here, but that doesn't mean you get a free pass." Sarah looked around the table, clearly flustered. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed and pulled some cash out of her wallet. She handed it over to Matt, who took it with a smile and said, "Thank you. That's all we wanted." After that, the mood shifted back to what it had been before. Everyone was still laughing, and we all got up to leave the restaurant. As we walked out, Sarah stayed quiet for the most part, but no one was giving her a hard time anymore. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like we had finally addressed the elephant in the room, and now we could all just move on. As we left the restaurant, we all started joking about the whole situation. It was clear that no one was holding a grudge, but at the same time, we weren't going to let Sarah off the hook so easily anymore. It felt like a turning point, like maybe she had finally gotten the message. The fact that Sarah actually had her wallet with her the whole time, and was just trying to get out of paying, was almost too ridiculous to believe. But at the same time, it made perfect sense, given everything that had happened before. I don't know if Sarah will change her ways after this, but I do know that things are different now. She can't just assume that we'll cover for her without question, and she definitely can't use the "I'm a girl" excuse to get out of taking responsibility for herself. We're all adults here, and we all have our own expenses to deal with. It's not about gender, it's about fairness and respect. Am I Alita because I refused to pay for my friend and laughed at her? ITA for preemptively striking against splitting the bill at a group dinner. So, a little context. I'm part of this friend group that meets up for dinner every now and then. We're talking once or twice a month, sometimes more if there's an occasion. In this group, we've got 5 solos, including myself, and 2 couples who, well, let's just say they have a reputation. For as long as I've known them, these 2 couples have this thing about splitting the check evenly no matter what, and they always seem to treat group dinners as their chance to have a meal on someone else's dime. You know the type, ordering appetizers like they're free samples, cocktails like they're the only ones thirsty, and always opting. Now, I usually avoid these dinners. I just can't deal with the whole split it evenly routine when I'm sitting there eating a reasonably priced pasta dish and drinking a Coke, while they're downing steak, shrimp, fancy desserts, and cocktails. It's frustrating, and quite frankly, I work hard for my money, and I don't like throwing it away to subsidize someone else's lavish night out. So, for a while, I've been the guy that politely declines these group invites. No harm, no foul. But, recently, I got invited again, and the message that caught my attention was, "Oh, and the freeloaders aren't coming this time." Yes, they're called the freeloaders by everyone behind their backs, but nobody has the guts to say it to their faces. Seeing that they wouldn't be there, I thought, hey, this could be a nice time to catch up with everyone, so I agreed. I wanted to enjoy a chill dinner, and it felt like a safe bet since the usual drama wasn't going to be there. It's been a while since I've hung out with everyone, and I was honestly looking forward to it. So I got dressed up, grabbed my keys, and headed to the restaurant. I showed up at the place, a pretty nice restaurant downtown. As I walked in, I was all smiles, thinking, finally, no stress, no splitting the check nonsense. I said my hellos and took my seat. And that's when it happened. I heard this laugh, and I swear, my heart dropped. I turned around, and there they were, the freeloading couple sitting at the table. I had to do a double take because I was honestly stunned. I could feel that sinking feeling in my stomach. You know that feeling when you just know something's gonna go sideways? Yeah, that. I didn't even bother asking anyone what they were doing there or why I'd been misled about their attendance. Maybe it was a last-minute change, maybe not, it didn't matter. All I knew was that if I stuck around and did things the way we always do, I was gonna be footing a solid portion of the bill for their gourmet experience. So I put my game face on, took a deep breath, and decided I was not letting them take me for a ride this time. The night started off pretty standard. We all ordered, chatted, and caught up on life. I ordered a pasta dish, something mid-priced, and a Coke, nothing crazy. Meanwhile, the freeloaders were in full swing, ordering appetizers for the table, which, surprise surprise, they were the only ones really eating. It felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, but I kept my cool. I smiled, nodded, and participated in the conversation. Then the drinks started flowing, for them at least cocktails, bottles of wine, you name it. All while I sat there with my Coke, taking small sips, just trying to stay calm and not let it get to me. As dinner wrapped up, I knew it was go time. I excused myself from the table, saying I needed to use the restroom. Instead, I found our server. He was a young guy, looked like he might have been in his early 20s. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Would you mind separating my bill from the rest of the group?" He nodded, smiled, and said, "Of course, no problem at all." I thanked him, feeling an instant sense of relief. At least someone understood. I went back to the table, and soon enough, the server came around with the check. He handed me my separate bill, and I pulled out my card and handed it over to him immediately. As he walked away, I could see the freeloaders exchange a look, like something was off. When he came back with my receipt, I signed it, left a solid 25% tip because the guy deserved it, and that's when the freeloaders finally spoke up. One of them, let's call him Bob, looked at me with a confused expression and said, "Oh, I thought we were splitting it like we always do." I gave him a polite smile and said, "Oh, well, you're bad." And that's when the atmosphere changed. You could feel the tension at the table, like everyone was holding their breath. After my little comment, two of the other solos looked at each other and then at the server and said, "Actually, can we get separate checks too?" The server nodded, no complaints at all, and started working it out. I could see the freeloaders were getting increasingly agitated, whispering among themselves, looking at their phones, probably doing some mental math to figure out how much more they were gonna have to pay now that their usual victims had opted out. Once my bill was settled, I stood up, smiled at everyone, and said, "All right, folks, it's been fun. I'm gonna head out, good night." A few of them smiled back, a bit awkwardly, and said their goodbyes. The freeloaders barely looked at me, which I took as a badge of honor at that point. I walked out of there feeling light, like I'd finally stood up for myself against this ridiculous tradition. But, of course, it didn't end there. The next morning, I woke up to a text from one of the other people in the group. It wasn't one of the solos who had asked for a separate bill. It was someone who had kept quiet during the entire thing. Let's call her Megan. Megan basically sent me this long message about how my actions had disrupted the group vibe and how I was being in awe for making a scene. She said the freeloaders felt awkward and blindsided because we always split the bill evenly and that the whole point of these dinners was for everyone to enjoy themselves without worrying about costs. She even added that splitting it evenly helps with the 20% group gratuity, which, honestly, felt like such a reach. I was stunned. I mean, was I supposed to just keep letting them take advantage of me? I texted her back, saying I wasn't going to be guilted into spending beyond my means, especially when it was clear that the freeloaders were exploiting this setup. I also reminded her that the only reason I'd come in the first place was because I'd been told that these freeloaders wouldn't be there. I told her they've been pulling this crap for years, and I was tired of it. Megan responded with some passive-aggressive comment about how I should have just played along for the sake of the group and that my actions made others reconsider how they were paying too, which caused confusion and disrupted the dinner. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It wasn't like I stood up on my chair and shouted, "Separate checks for everyone." I literally just quietly handled my own bill and left. And here's the kicker. I found out later that two of the solos who asked for separate bills had actually texted each other afterward, saying they were glad I did what I did because they'd felt the same way for a long time, but didn't want to be the first to rock the boat. So, if anything, I feel like I finally gave people the push they needed to stand up to this freeloading nonsense. But now, I'm getting the cold shoulder from some people in the group, and there's this weird tension hanging over everything. It feels like I broke some unspoken rule, and I'm left wondering if I should have just sucked it up and dealt with the unfair split, or if I did the right thing by setting a boundary. Update. So, I've got an update for everyone. Honestly, I'm feeling a mix of emotions about everything that's unfolded since that dinner. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who weighed in on my situation. I took a lot of your comments to heart, and it turns out, you all were more right than I could have ever imagined. After that weird text from Megan calling me out for disrupting the group vibe, I decided I wasn't just going to stew in this drama alone. I forwarded her text to the two people, who also asked for separate bills. Let's call them Dan and Rachel. I wanted to get their take on it because it really seemed like everyone was getting dragged into this nonsense, and I wasn't going to let my actions be misrepresented. Anyway, I texted them both, and, wow, their reactions were unexpected. Both Dan and Rachel were actually pissed off about the message Megan had sent me. Dan responded first, and I could tell he was typing like a madman, because I got like 4 separate messages within a minute of each other. He was really blunt about it. That's total BS. You're definitely not the I'm glad you did what you did. He went on to say that he was getting tired of the moochers too and had been dreading these dinners for months. He said that, honestly, he'd wished he had stood up for himself sooner, but he always found himself going along to avoid rocking the boat. Then Rachel chimed in with her take, and it really surprised me. She said something that really put things into perspective for me. She said, "The group vibe was disrupted the first time you stopped coming." I was taken aback for a second and asked her to elaborate. Rachel explained that everyone knew why I stopped showing up, even if it wasn't explicitly talked about. It made the freeloading this massive elephant in the room. She said she could see the guilt on people's faces sometimes, especially the other solos, who were also tired of the splitting routine. But nobody wanted to bring it up, so they just let it fester and avoided confronting the issue. She admitted she was too passive to be the first one to do anything about it, but that when I left, it put a strain on everyone because, well, there was this unspoken awareness that things weren't fair. She ended her text by saying she and Dan missed having me at these dinners, and that it was nice to have someone who finally called out the unfairness, even if I didn't do it in a dramatic way. Honestly, that part really got me. I had no idea my absence had actually made that kind of impact. To hear them both say they missed me made me feel a lot better about everything. I wasn't just being selfish by not wanting to subsidize someone else's fancy meals. I was setting a boundary that needed to be set, and apparently, it had given other people the courage to start questioning things too. So, after we had this conversation, the three of us, me, Dan, and Rachel, decided we needed to reach out to Megan. Megan, by the way, is the person who usually organizes these dinners, so she's kind of the glue of the group in that way. We wanted to talk to her directly and try to figure out where her head was at, especially since she seemed to be the most upset about the disruption. When we got Megan on a call, she sounded a bit nervous at first, which made me think she knew we wanted to talk about more than just her text. I started off by apologizing if I made her feel uncomfortable at the dinner, but also told her that I needed to set my boundaries. I told her I didn't think it was fair for me to keep subsidizing these extravagant meals just because a couple of people decided they were entitled to order the most expensive items every single time. And then Megan said something I didn't expect. She apologized to me. She said, "I'm really sorry, I should have communicated better." She went on to explain that, actually, the freeloading couples had decided last minute that they were going to come to the dinner after all. She knew about it with plenty of time to let me know, but didn't because she really wanted me to be there. She admitted that when she saw my face after I walked in and saw them, she immediately knew she'd made the wrong call. She could tell I was frustrated, but she just didn't know how to handle the situation. Megan then confessed that she was tired of the freeloaders too, but was too much of a coward, her words, to say something to them directly. And because she didn't say anything, it only fueled their confidence to keep saying, "Well, this is just how we always do it." Megan said didn't like it her to see me frustrated and know that she'd put me in that position, especially because she didn't even enjoy having them there. She just didn't want to be the bad guy. She then filled us in on what happened after we left. This part, I have to admit, was pretty satisfying to hear. After I left, and then shortly after that Dan and Rachel both left too. Megan said the tension at the table was very high. Apparently, once the server came back around, the remaining solos who hadn't initially asked for separate checks decided to go ahead and get separate bills as well. This didn't sit well with the freeloading couples, and they didn't even try to hide their frustration. Megan said they started grumbling about how this wasn't how we usually do it and how splitting the bill evenly was just easier for everyone. But that's not even the best part. The freeloaders actually tried to justify their behavior. They went on this spiel about how they have more expenses than the rest of us and that we should be willing to help them have a little joy in their lives by splitting things evenly. Can you believe that? Megan said they were acting like we were all being heartless for not wanting to pay for their luxurious dinner habits. One of them even said, "Wouldn't it be hard for you to help us from time to time?" Megan told us she wanted to snap back. It's been way more than once in a while, but she held her tongue. Still, you could tell she was over it, and the rest of the group had had enough too. Anyway, the freeloaders were clearly fuming by the end of it, and the vibe at the table was completely off. Megan said the rest of the night was super awkward, and it ended with everyone kind of rushing out after paying their individual bills. The freeloaders were visibly unhappy, and they barely said goodbye to anyone. After hearing all of this, the four of us, me, Dan, Rachel, and Megan, had a real heart-to-heart. We talked about how we wanted to handle things moving forward. None of us wanted to keep dealing with the freeloaders, and we definitely didn't want to go back to the split the bill evenly nonsense, especially now that everyone had seen how much better it felt to just pay for what you ordered and be done with it. So, we decided we're going to start something new. We're starting our own little group dinner tradition, just the four of us for now, at a different restaurant. We're going to choose a place where we can all feel comfortable ordering whatever we want without worrying about someone taking advantage of the situation. Megan even said she was excited to plan it, and this time, we all agreed that separate checks would be the standard going forward. No more tiptoeing around the freeloaders, no more pretending that everything is fine when it's not. Just good food, good company, and everyone paying their fair share. Megan also mentioned that if anyone else from the original group wanted to join, they'd be welcome as long as they understood the new arrangement. We're not excluding anyone, but we're also not going to be taken advantage of anymore. And if the freeloaders want to come, they'll be informed upfront that it's separate checks only, no exceptions. I have a feeling that might be enough to keep them away, but honestly, I don't care either way. This whole situation has been a wild ride, but it feels like we finally turned a corner. I'm really looking forward to our next dinner, one where I can actually enjoy myself without worrying about subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. And it feels amazing to know that I'm not alone in feeling this way, that other people were tired of it too but just needed a push to stand up for themselves. So, that's where things are at now. I've learned a lot through this experience, not just about setting boundaries, but also about how sometimes you've got to be the one to make a move if you want things to change. I'm really grateful to Dan, Rachel, and Megan for standing by me, and I'm hopeful that our new group dinners are going to be even better than before. It's funny how something as simple as paying for your own meal can end up making such a big difference, but here we are. And to those freeloaders, maybe it's time to learn how to budget. Update. So, I didn't expect to have another update so soon, but what happened at our first new group dinner was too wild not to share. If you are one of the people invested in the freeloaders' antics, you're going to want to hear this. We decided to put our plan into action and set up our first new dinner. It was me, Dan, Rachel, and Megan, and we picked a restaurant none of us had been to before, a nice little Italian place across town. We figured a fresh start deserved a fresh venue, plus the food looked amazing online, and the reviews were solid. None of us knew what to expect, but we all agreed we were ready for a drama-free night where we could actually enjoy ourselves. So, the day of the dinner rolls around, and we're all excited. We meet at the restaurant, and the vibe is instantly great. Megan has this big smile on her face, and Rachel's cracking jokes before we even get inside. We get seated at a cozy table in the back corner, and it feels perfect, like a nice, quiet spot where we can just chill and catch up. We order our drinks, and the waiter is super nice. He's got this cheerful energy that just makes everything feel even more relaxed. When we get to ordering our food, I notice there's this buzz of conversation and laughter in the air, and I'm feeling optimistic about the night. For the first time in a while, I don't have that nagging anxiety about the bill, or about who's going to order what and how much it's all going to cost me. We each pick exactly what we want, no judgment, no worries about splitting things evenly, just the freedom to get what we actually feel like eating. We settle in, and our food comes out. I ordered a carbonara, and let me tell you, it was amazing. Creamy, rich, perfectly seasoned. We're all diving into our meals and just enjoying each other's company, and it feels good, like we found our little groove again. We're talking, laughing, and sharing stories when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I see something that makes me pause. It takes me a second to register what I'm seeing, but then I lean in to whisper to Megan, "Hey, isn't that?" And she follows my gaze. There, not too far away, sitting at a table on the other side of the restaurant, are none other than the freeloaders, both couples, all four of them. Megan's eyes widen, and she gives me this look like, "You've got to be kidding me." I nudge Dan and Rachel too, and pretty soon, we're all glancing over, trying to be subtle, but also kind of amazed by this coincidence. The freeloaders are sitting there, at a table with another group of people, none of whom we recognize, and they seem to be having a pretty lively conversation. Now, I know some people might say that this is just a coincidence and that maybe they just wanted to try out the new restaurant too, but honestly, it was just too funny. Here we were, trying to escape the freeloading drama, and boom, there they are, almost like the universe was playing some sort of cosmic joke on us. We tried not to stare, and we got back to our own conversation, but I could tell we were all keeping an ear open to the freeloaders' table. At first, it seemed like they were having a good time. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of loud talking, and they were ordering quite a bit of food, appetizers, drinks, the works. It honestly made me wonder if they'd pulled the same trick on this new group that they had on us. Anyway, we continued with our meal, but it wasn't long before the energy at the freeloaders' table started to change. It started with one of the freeloading couples, the husband and wife, kind of muttering something that sounded tense. The woman from the other group, who looked like she might have been the one organizing their dinner, seemed to get this confused expression, like she didn't understand what was going on. Then came the familiar tone, low, annoyed, and unmistakable, "Well, this is how we always do it." I think my ears perked up like a dog who just heard the treat bag rustle. Megan, who had been in the middle of telling us a story about her dog eating her favorite shoes, stopped talking and gave me a look like, "Are you hearing this too?" The volume at the freeloaders' table started getting louder. The couple who'd tried to freeload off us last time were now clearly arguing with their new group. I heard bits and pieces stuff about expenses and just easier to split it evenly, and I could feel Dan beside me trying not to laugh. The other group seemed confused, but also not willing to back down. I heard someone say, "But I only ordered a salad and water," which was pretty much déjà vu from what we'd experienced with them before. At this point, I think we all kind of stopped pretending we weren't eavesdropping. I could see Megan biting her lip, trying not to burst out laughing, and Rachel had her hand covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking slightly. The freeloaders were getting increasingly agitated, while the other group seemed to be standing their ground. It was like watching a replay of what had happened with us, but this time from a safe distance, and it was honestly a little validating. It escalated for a bit, and then, all of a sudden, it seemed like things just imploded. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to know that the other group was done with the freeloaders' nonsense. They ended up getting separate checks after all, and you could see the irritation written all over the freeloaders' faces. They were definitely not happy about it. The rest of the group paid their bills, each individually, and left without saying much more. They clearly didn't want anything to do with the freeloaders after that argument. So there the freeloaders were, left sitting alone at the table, looking super annoyed and awkward. You could tell they were trying to save face, but honestly, it was pretty satisfying to watch them deal with the fallout of their own entitlement. Eventually, they called the waiter over and, grudgingly, paid their own bill. They left shortly after, still looking sour. The entire time, we just sat there, trying not to make eye contact with them so we wouldn't get pulled into their drama, but it was so hard not to laugh. Once they were gone, Megan let out this massive breath she'd apparently been holding and whispered, "Did that seriously just happen?" We all just lost it. Dan was the first to start laughing, and it quickly spread to the rest of us. I couldn't help it, there was just something about seeing these freeloaders try to pull the same trick on a completely different group, and then watching it backfire on them, that felt incredibly vindicating. It was like karma had decided to make an appearance, right there in the middle of the Italian restaurant. When our waiter came back, we were all still giggling, and we asked for our separate checks, of course. The waiter, who'd probably heard some of the freeloaders' commotion, smiled knowingly and didn't even bat an eye. We each paid for our meals, no drama, no tension, no freeloading couples trying to guilt us into paying for their extravagance, and it felt so good. Just for friends having a nice dinner, enjoying each other's company, and paying their own way. Honestly, it was the best dinner we'd had in a long time. So, Reddit, Ada for finally refusing to split the bill evenly with the freeloaders and getting my own separate check. Ada for refusing to split the bill evenly when I barely ate anything. I figured I'd share it here to see if I was actually in the wrong, or if my friends were just being unreasonable. For some background, I'm a 27-year-old guy, and my group of friends, let's call them Steve, Emma, Chris, Katie, and Jess, have been pretty close for a while now. We've been through all kinds of things together, from college struggles to first jobs to breakups, you name it. We have this tradition of going out for dinner every now and then, usually once a month. Normally, it's a pretty casual event, and we have a great time. But this time, it kind of went sideways. It was Jess's idea to go to this particular restaurant. She had been raving about it for weeks. It's this fancy spot downtown, known for its great food but also pretty steep prices. I didn't really care much where we went after all. It was meant to be a fun night out with friends, but I wasn't exactly thrilled about the price tag. See, I'd just gotten hit with an unexpected car repair bill earlier that week, and my budget for the month was a bit tight. But I figured, what the hell, I'll just get something light. So, we get to the restaurant, and it's as fancy as advertised. The kind of place where there are cloth napkins folded all fancy-like, and the menu doesn't even have prices for some of the dishes. You just have to assume you're getting something premium. Immediately, I start glancing through the appetizer section. I didn't want to be that guy who orders just water, but I also didn't want to end up spending $70 on a dinner I wasn't that hungry for. I settled on a small appetizer, some kind of crispy calamari dish and a soda. Simple, light, nothing that would make my wallet cry. In total, it came to about $15. Meanwhile, my friends were clearly in a celebratory mood. Jess and Katie ordered cocktails that looked like they had small gardens growing in them. Steve went for a steak that looked like it had come straight from a magazine, and Chris ordered a bunch of different things: appetizers, a main course, and, of course, an overpriced glass of wine. Emma got a seafood platter that came with a tiny candlelit stand and all. It was clear that everyone was going all out, and hey, more power to them. I didn't mind at all, I just wasn't on that vibe. We were chatting, laughing, just generally enjoying the night, and I thought everything was cool. I wasn't eating much, but I was definitely enjoying being there. We talked about random stuff: work stress, the latest Marvel movie, who was dating whom. The vibe was good, and I was genuinely having a nice time. The food arrived, everyone dug in, and there was a lot of passing plates around, everyone trying each other's dishes. It's always been one of my favorite parts about hanging out with this group. No pretenses, just good company. But then, the check came. The waiter set down that ominous black folder right in the middle of the table. I always feel a little awkward at this moment, not because I don't want to pay, but just because I know it can get complicated. My plan was straightforward. I'd pay for my calamari and drink, tip the waiter well, and be done. I reached for my wallet as soon as the bill landed. Before I could say anything, though, Chris, who's usually pretty easygoing, made a suggestion. He said, "Let's just split it evenly, guys. It's easier that way." Now, if we had all gotten similar things, I wouldn't have had an issue with that. But I could already tell that splitting evenly was going to cost me way more than what I'd actually ordered. I glanced at the receipt as it was passed around. The total bill was around $300. Doing some quick mental math, that meant I'd end up paying around $50 instead of my actual $15, and I wasn't exactly comfortable with that. I spoke up. I said, "Hey, I only ordered an appetizer and a drink, so I'd rather just pay for my share if that's cool." I tried to say it casually, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. I figured everyone would understand. It was clear that my order was a fraction of what others had gotten. Steve and Emma nodded and were like, "Yeah, no problem." But then Katie and Jess gave me a look, one of those really kind of looks. Jess, especially, seemed annoyed. She sighed and said something like, "It's just easier if we split it evenly, you know. It's not that big of a deal." I stayed firm but tried to keep it light. I smiled and said, "I get that, but I really didn't get much tonight, and I'm kind of on a budget right now. I just prefer to pay for what I actually ordered." There was a moment of awkward silence. Chris shrugged and said, "Whatever, man, do what you need to do." Katie, though, didn't seem ready to drop it. She muttered, "Honestly, it's just a few dollars, and it's kind of what friends do, you know, just split things." I tried not to let it bother me, but it definitely felt like she was calling me out. I didn't want to argue, so I just handed over my $20, said, "Here's for mine," and tried to move the conversation forward. Eventually, we figured out everyone's share, and I thought that was the end of it. After the bill was settled, I could tell that the vibe had shifted a bit. It wasn't as light and fun as before, and that sucked because I felt like I'd somehow ruined things just by wanting to pay my own way. Katie and Jess were a bit quieter, and Chris seemed kind of distant. I felt a mix of emotions: embarrassed for standing out, annoyed that I was being made to feel bad for being practical, and a little hurt that my friends thought I was being cheap over this. We left the restaurant, and everyone kind of split off after that. There wasn't the usual talk about where to go next or grabbing a drink at someone's place. I got an Uber home and tried to convince myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't want to pay triple what I ordered, and I shouldn't have to, right? But the story didn't end there. The next day, in our group chat, the topic came up again. Jess was the one who brought it up. She sent a message saying, "Hey, I just wanted to say that last night was kind of awkward, and I think we all need to make sure we are on the same page about splitting bills when we go out." Katie chimed in with, "Yeah, honestly, it was kind of a vibe killer to argue about a few dollars. We're all friends, it should be about the experience, not nitpicking over the bill." I read those messages and felt my stomach drop. I tried to explain myself again, saying that I wasn't comfortable paying so much more than what I'd ordered, especially since I hadn't been that hungry in the first place. I even said that I was sorry if I made things awkward, but that I thought it was fair for me to pay for what I got and nothing more. Katie responded with, "I get it, but when we go out as a group, it's just kind of understood that we split things. It makes everything smoother, and no one has to do math at the table. It's about the vibe, you know?" I felt like I was being ganged up on. Steve and Emma stayed out of it, and Chris just reacted with a thumbs up emoji to one of Katie's messages. I ended up not replying further, because I didn't want to escalate things. But honestly, I'm still thinking about it. I feel like I was put in an unfair position where either I paid a lot more than I should have, or I got labeled as the cheap friend who ruined the vibe. I've always been the kind of person who believes in fairness. If I had ordered the same as everyone else, I would have had no problem splitting the bill, but that wasn't the case here. I wasn't trying to be difficult or stingy, I just wanted to pay for what I actually consumed. But now I'm left wondering if I was in the wrong, or if I just have different expectations around these things than my friends do. So, after that whole incident, things were awkward for a while. I kept my distance from the group, not out of spite, but more because I felt like there was a kind of unspoken tension between us. It was that kind of situation where you're not sure if everything's okay or if people are still holding a grudge. I didn't want to push things and make it worse, but I also wasn't going to apologize again for something I genuinely believed wasn't wrong. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and the group chat started to pick up again. I was feeling hopeful maybe everyone had moved on, and we could just get back to how things were before. Steve and Emma were sharing memes. Jess was talking about her new job, and it felt like we were finally starting to click back into our old rhythm. It was a relief, honestly. I missed the group, and I missed hanging out with my friends without feeling judged or awkward. A few days later, Jess suggested that we do another dinner night, and my stomach dropped a little. I wasn't sure I was ready to go through another billing fiasco, but I figured that maybe things would be different this time. After all, we'd talked about it in the group chat, and they knew where I stood. I thought, maybe they understood my perspective now, and there wouldn't be any hard feelings if I chose to pay my share again. The restaurant Jess chose this time was another upscale one, and while I wasn't exactly excited about the prices, I decided to go anyway. I thought it was important to show that I was still willing to be part of the group, that I wasn't holding a grudge or anything. I even convinced myself that this dinner could be a fresh start, no drama, just friends enjoying a nice meal together. I tried to be optimistic about it. We arrived at the restaurant, and right off the bat, I could tell that everyone was in a celebratory mood again. The place was definitely a step up from our usual spots: dim lighting, candles, that kind of ambience that screams, get ready to spend some serious cash. We were seated at a big round table, and everyone started looking at the menu. I was scanning for something affordable, something light, just like last time. I ended up going for a small pasta dish and a glass of water. My order was around $20 tops. On the other hand, my friends seemed to be on a completely different wavelength. Steve ordered some fancy steak again. Jess got a seafood platter that looked like it could feed an entire family. Katie and Emma were debating over which bottle of wine to get, and eventually, they ordered a bottle for the table. Chris, as usual, was ordering a bit of everything: appetizers, a main course, and dessert. I stayed quiet and smiled along, trying not to feel out of place. I wanted to have a good time, and I didn't want to be the odd one out. Dinner went on, and honestly, it was fun. We laughed, we talked, we caught up on each other's lives. I really thought this time, things were going to end on a good note. When the food came, everyone shared bites again, and it felt like old times. My anxiety about the bill was in the back of my mind, but I tried my best not to let it show. I didn't want to ruin the evening by bringing up money, and I convinced myself that it wouldn't be an issue. Surely my friends wouldn't expect me to pay the same amount as them when I clearly hadn't ordered the same. Eventually, the waiter brought the check, and I could feel the tension rise within me. I wanted to believe it would be different this time. I wanted to believe my friends would understand. Chris grabbed the bill and gave it a quick glance, and before I could even think about speaking up, he said, "All right, let's just split it evenly again, guys." I froze for a moment, hoping that maybe someone would speak up for me, maybe Emma or Steve, since they'd seemed understanding last time. But, to my dismay, everyone just nodded along. It was like déjà vu, except this time, I knew what was coming. I took a deep breath and said, trying to keep my tone as light as possible, "Actually, I think I'd prefer to just pay for my own again. I really didn't get that much tonight, so it wouldn't be fair for me to split evenly." The moment I said it, I could feel the atmosphere shift. Katie sighed loudly, and Jess rolled her eyes. Chris, who still had the bill in his hands, looked at me with this exasperated expression. He said, "Dude, come on, we've talked about this. It's just easier to split it evenly. We're all friends here, it's not a big deal." Katie chimed in, "Yeah, honestly, let's not ruin the vibe again. It's just a few extra dollars. We're here to have a good time, not to nitpick over the check." I could feel my face getting hot, and I was caught between wanting to stand my ground and not wanting to make a scene. I glanced at Steve and Emma, hoping they'd back me up, but they both just kind of looked down at their hands, clearly not wanting to get involved. I swallowed and said, "Look, it's not about the money, it's just that I didn't order as much as everyone else. I'm happy to pay for what I got, but splitting it evenly means I'm paying more than double what I actually ordered." Jess, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. She looked right at me and said, "You're really going to do this again? We're all trying to have a nice night, and you're making it awkward. It's just what we do as friends. We split it, and no one has to worry about it. You're kind of ruining the vibe right now." I felt a lump form in my throat. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and it was like I was back in high school, being called out in front of the class. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to just walk out, but I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't want to be that guy who storms out and makes everything dramatic. I just wanted to be treated fairly, but at that moment, it felt like I was alone in that. Chris then added, in a more firm tone, "Look, man, we're all just trying to make this easy. We're not asking for a lot here, just split it evenly, and let's move on, please." I could feel my resolve crumbling. I didn't want to fight with my friends, and I didn't want to be the one who ruined the vibe again. I sighed, defeated, and finally said, "Fine, I'll pay the split." Katie smiled, almost as if nothing had happened, and said, "Great. See, that wasn't so hard." Jess nodded, and Chris gave a quick nod of approval. I watched as Chris calculated how much we each owed, and I pulled out my card, trying to keep my face neutral, even though I felt like my insides were twisting. When the waiter came by, we all handed over our cards, and I paid my share $55, when my actual meal had been $20. I sat there, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was fuming. I felt like I had been forced into something I didn't agree with, just to keep the peace. The rest of the group seemed completely unbothered, like nothing had happened, and they moved on with their conversations. I tried to join in, but I couldn't shake the feeling of resentment building up inside me. When we finally left the restaurant, everyone was making plans to grab a drink at a nearby bar, but I made an excuse about having an early morning and called an Uber instead. I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend like everything was okay when I felt so disrespected. I didn't want to blow up at them, but I also didn't want to sit there and let my frustration simmer any longer. I needed space. In the Uber ride home, I replayed everything in my head, wondering if I was really the one in the wrong. Was I just being stubborn? Was it really that unreasonable to want to pay for what I actually ordered? I couldn't help but feel hurt that my friends, people I'd known for years, couldn't see where I was coming from. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. I just didn't think it was fair for me to pay for everyone else's expensive meals when I clearly hadn't ordered the same. When I got home, I sat on my couch, staring at my phone. The group chat was already buzzing with messages, photos from the bar, jokes, more plans. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I felt like I didn't belong, like I was somehow on the outside of this group I'd always considered my closest friends. They didn't understand me, and worse, they didn't seem to care to try. After that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling of frustration. I spent the entire weekend going back and forth in my mind, wondering if I was truly the unreasonable one or if I just had different expectations from my friends. I didn't hear much from them until the next day when a notification from our group chat popped up. It was Katie. She'd sent a photo of them at the bar, captioned, "Last night was awesome. Glad we didn't have any drama over the bill this time." The message hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like she was throwing it in my face, as if my wanting to pay my fair share was some kind of nuisance that they were finally free from. I watched as Steve, Jess, and Chris all liked the message. Steve replied with, "Yeah, glad we all got to relax for once," and Jess added, 100%, no stress, just vibes. I didn't reply. I just stared at my phone, feeling that familiar weight in my chest. It was so unfair. They genuinely thought I was the problem. That my wanting to pay for what I actually ordered was somehow ruining their fun. I wasn't being stingy. I wasn't trying to make things difficult. I just didn't want to be taken advantage of. After a lot of stewing over it, I decided that I needed to make them understand what it felt like to be in my shoes. Maybe if they experienced the unfairness themselves, they'd finally get why I was so uncomfortable splitting the bill equally when we all ordered so differently. I knew it was a bit petty, but honestly, I was at my wit's end, and I felt like nothing else had worked. So, the next week, I decided to invite them out to dinner myself. I chose a restaurant that I knew would have options ranging from very reasonable to quite expensive. It wasn't some ultra-fancy place, but definitely somewhere we could all find something good. I posted in the group chat, "Hey, how about we all grab dinner on Friday? My treat to pick the place this time." They were all down, and Jess even commented, "Oh, it's been a while since you picked a spot." "I'm in," everyone else quickly agreed, and I started planning. I knew what I was going to do, and I was determined to see it through. Friday came around, and we all met up at the restaurant. I was nervous but tried not to show it. I kept up the small talk as we walked in and got seated, hoping my nerves wouldn't betray my plan. Once we got our menus, I immediately zeroed in on the most expensive items. There was a steak on there that was almost $60 by itself, and I also eyed a couple of appetizers, plus a dessert and a cocktail. I knew it was excessive, but I had a point to make. Steve noticed and looked over at me with a raised eyebrow. "Whoa, you're going all out tonight, huh?" he said with a half smile. I grinned back at him, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah, why not? Been a long week, I deserve a treat," I said, shrugging it off. Katie, who was sitting across from me, chimed in. "Are you sure, though? I mean, that's a lot. It's not like you to go for the expensive stuff." I waved them off, playing it cool. "It's fine, seriously. I just feel like splurging tonight." Everyone else stuck to their usual style, one entree each, maybe an appetizer or two to share. They all ordered modestly, but I kept piling things on. 2 appetizers, the steak, a side dish, a fancy cocktail, and a slice of cheesecake for dessert. It was almost embarrassing, but I was determined to follow through. I tried to keep up the friendly banter as the night went on, but my mind kept coming back to the bill. When the food came, we all dug in, and I even offered people bites of the appetizers, trying to keep everything feeling as normal as possible. The conversation was flowing, and I could tell that everyone was having a good time. Part of me almost felt guilty, but I reminded myself that I wasn't doing this for no reason. I needed them to understand how unfair it felt to be forced into paying more than my share. Finally, when we were all done and the waiter brought the check, I didn't hesitate. I reached for it before anyone else could, opening the billfold and glancing at the total. It was a little over $200. Most of that was my order. I cleared my throat, plastering on a smile. "All right, guys, let's just split it evenly. Yeah, makes it easier for everyone." I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light. "Come on, guys, we're all friends here, right? We're not going to make it complicated by calculating who owes what. Let's just split it evenly and keep the vibe going." Katie stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But your food was, like, the same cost as what we all got combined. It doesn't really make sense for us to split it evenly, does it?" I could tell she was trying to be polite, but there was a definite edge to her voice. I just smiled back, keeping my tone casual but firm. "Hey, last time we split the bill evenly, even though I didn't get much. You guys said it was about keeping things simple, about the vibe, right? I'm just following the same logic here." There was a long, awkward silence. Jess looked like she wanted to say something, but she just pressed her lips together, glancing around the table. Steve looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Finally, Katie sighed heavily. "Fine, whatever. Let's just split it," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. I could feel the tension at the table as everyone reluctantly nodded. Chris pulled out his phone, doing the quick math for everyone's share. When he told them how much it was, over $50 each, everyone's expression soured. I knew they weren't happy about it, but I was determined to see this through. I handed over my card, along with the others, and we paid. The rest of the night was awkward, to say the least. We all made our way out of the restaurant, and I could tell that the vibe was completely different from earlier. No one was making plans for a bar or drinks afterward. Instead, everyone just sort of mumbled their goodbyes, clearly eager to leave. I got into my car, feeling a mix of satisfaction and regret. I knew I'd made my point, but I also knew I'd probably pissed everyone off in the process. Later that night, I got a notification from the group chat. It was Jess. She wrote, "Hey, so, can we all agree that no one pulls that kind of stunt again? If you want to pay for what you ordered, just say so upfront. This wasn't cool, and it felt like you were trying to prove something." Katie quickly followed up, "Yeah, I don't know what that was about, but it sucked. If you want to pay your own way, fine. Just don't drag the rest of us into some kind of point-making exercise." I read the messages, and felt a little guilty. Maybe I'd gone too far. But I also felt like they finally understood a little bit of what I'd been feeling, how unfair it was to be pressured into paying more than my share, just because it was easier for everyone else. I decided not to reply right away. I needed time to cool off, to really think about how I wanted to handle things moving forward. The next day, I finally replied, "I'm sorry if it felt like I was trying to make a point. I just wanted you guys to understand how I felt last time. I didn't mean for it to come off like that, but I felt like no one was really hearing me. From now on, I'm happy to just pay for what I order, and I won't make a fuss about it. I hope we can move past this. There was a pause in the chat, and eventually, Chris replied, "Alright, let's just call it even and move on. No more surprises, okay?" Katie and Jess liked the message, and Steve added, "Fair enough. Let's just keep things chill from here on out." For a moment, no one said anything. They all just looked at me, and I could see the confusion starting to settle in. Chris finally spoke up. Dude, I mean, you ordered way more than the rest of us. Maybe we should just pay for what we got." He had this nervous chuckle, like he wasn't quite sure if I was serious. So, Reddit, was I wrong for not wanting to split the bill evenly? Should I have just sucked it up and paid the $50 to keep the peace, even though I only ordered $15 worth of food? I hate that this small thing has caused tension with my friends, but I also don't think it's fair for me to subsidize everyone else's expensive meals just because they wanted to have a fancy night out.